My name is Abigail Frances Whitmore, born Abigail Frances Dunning on the 3rd day of April in the year 1835 in Macon County, North Carolina, in the hill country above the Little Tennessee River. I am 79 years old. I have had a long life. I will not say it has been an easy one, because to say so would be a lie, and I am too old and too tired for lying. There was one day in my life that divided everything that came before it from everything that came after. One single day. Not a war, though the war touched us. Not a death, though death came with it. One morning in the spring of 1864, when I woke before light as I always did, put my feet on the cold floor, walked to the window, and understood within the span of 3 breaths that by nightfall I would have nothing left. I was right. And I want to tell you exactly how it happened. But to understand how a woman loses everything in a single day, you must first understand what everything meant. What it cost to build, what it felt like to hold it in your hands each morning and believe, as you are always foolish enough to believe, that it would still be there tomorrow. My father, James Dunning, settled in Macon County before I was born, on 86 acres along a creek bottom that ran cold and clear even in August, when everything else in the county went still and dry. He was not a prosperous man, but he was a methodical one, and methodical men in hill country accumulate slowly and hold on long. He grew corn and kept hogs and had a stand of apple trees that produced well enough to sell by the barrel in Franklin, 6 miles east, each autumn. We were not wealthy. We ate what we grew and wore what we made and went without what we could not manufacture from the materials at hand, which in those years in those mountains was the arrangement of virtually every family I knew. I was the eldest of 5. My mother, Sarah Dunning, was a woman of such thorough practicality that I did not fully appreciate her until I became one myself. She could do the work of 2 men and make it look like the work of half of one. She kept a clean house in conditions that would have broken a lesser woman. She did not complain. She regarded complaint the way she regarded idleness, as a form of dishonesty about one's own capacity. I grew up understanding that the land was not a possession, it was an obligation. My father said it that way exactly, and I heard it so many times that it became the operating principle of my own life without my ever having to decide to adopt it. You did not own the land. You were responsible for it. There is a difference that reaches into everything. I married Clement Whitmore in the autumn of 1856. I was 21 years old. Clement was 27, a broad, quiet man from Cherokee County with 102 acres and a timber operation along the ridge above his lower fields. He was not a romantic figure. He had large hands and a careful way of moving through a room, as though he was always conscious of taking up more space than he intended. I did not marry him for romance. I married him because when he sat across from my father at the kitchen table and talked about the land and what he intended to do with it, I heard in him the same language my father had always spoken. That was enough. That was, in fact, everything I required. We built together in those first years with a kind of quiet intensity that I have never seen between 2 people since. We cleared another 11 acres in the first 2 years. We added a second barn in 59. We ran 32 hogs by the spring of 1860 and had corn enough to sell surplus down in Murphy and still put away 8 months of our own provisions by October. I was pregnant with our second child when the war began making its noise in the lower part of the state. I remember thinking, with the particular stubbornness of a woman in her mid-20s who has worked very hard for what she has, that the war was something happening elsewhere. That was my first mistake in a long chain of them. Clement did not enlist immediately. He was 32 by 61, with a wife and 2 small children and a 102-acre farm that needed him in a manner the Confederate Army did not yet require of men his age. But by 63 the pressure had changed its character. It was no longer simply a matter of patriotism and enrollment. It was a matter of the county itself making clear that men who had not gone were being marked in ways that would outlast the war. Clement said nothing about this to me for weeks. I knew anyway. I always knew the things he would not say. That was the arrangement between us. He left in the February of 1863. He kissed both children and looked at me for a long moment, in the way that men look at things they are not certain they will see again. I did not cry at the gate. I went inside and I cried once, briefly, where the children could not see it. And then I put it away and began the business of running 102 acres and a timber operation with 2 children under 6 and a neighbor's boy of 14 who could split wood but could not be trusted with much else. I ran it. I say this without pride and without false modesty. I simply ran it because it required running, and I was the one available to run it. I kept the hogs. I kept the lower cornfield producing. I lost the timber operation in the second year because I could not get the logs down to the mill without men I did not have. And so that income simply ceased, and I adjusted to its absence and moved forward. There is a kind of efficiency that grief and necessity produce in a woman that I do not think can be arrived at any other way. Clement was wounded in the winter of 63 in Virginia, a ball through the left shoulder that left him with a permanent limitation in the arm that he carried for the rest of his life. He came home in the autumn of 64. He was 35 years old and looked 50. I did not say this to him. I said, "Welcome home," and meant it with my whole self, and we did not speak about the war for a long time, which was the only sensible arrangement. The day I lost everything was the 14th of April, 1864. Clement was still away. It was a dry spring, drier than any I had seen in Macon County, and the wind had been running hard from the southwest for 3 days straight. I was in the lower field with the children when the boy came running from the ridge road. He was running the way people only run when there is no time for words, and the words would not be adequate anyway. The fire had started in the timber stand above the upper barn. The wind carried it faster than anything in that country should move. By the time I reached the barnyard, the upper barn was entirely gone. Not burning, gone. A structure I had watched Clement and his brother build over 6 days in the summer of 58. 2 stories of hand-hewn timber and stone foundation, gone in the time it took me to run a 1/4 mile uphill with a child on my hip. I sent the boy for the neighbor. I got the animals out of the lower barn, the hogs I could not manage in time. I will not describe what that means for a person who has kept 30 hogs through a war year. I will only say that it is a sound you do not forget and do not want to remember and cannot stop hearing for a very long time. The house took another 2 hours. The wind shifted once, briefly, and I believed for perhaps 20 minutes that the house would survive. Then the wind corrected itself as the wind always does, and by 4 o'clock in the afternoon the house was a foundation and a chimney and a smell that I can produce in my memory right now without any effort at all. I stood at the edge of the yard with my 2 children, Eleanor, age 6, and James, age 4, and I looked at what remained of everything Clement and I had built in 8 years of deliberate, daily, unrelenting work. The lower barn was standing. I had saved that. I had saved the animals that were in it. I had saved my children. That was the accounting. The neighbor took us in for 6 weeks. Good people. Decent people. They did not make us feel the imposition, which is a more difficult thing to manage than most people acknowledge. I wrote to Clement through the regimental post. I told him what had happened in plain language because there was no other kind adequate to it, and because Clement was not a man who would have been served by softened language. I told him the upper barn was gone, the house was gone, the hogs were gone, and that Eleanor and James and I were living with the Ramseys on the North Road and were in good health. I told him to finish what he had gone to finish and come home when he was able. I told him I had the lower barn. He came home in October. We rebuilt. I want to say that simply because the simplicity of the statement is itself the truth of what it required. We rebuilt on the same foundation. We cut new timber from the ridge, the same ridge that had burned, because timber grows back and foundations do not move. Clement worked with one good arm and the stubbornness of a man who had survived Virginia and was not prepared to be defeated by his own hillside. I worked beside him every day that weather and children permitted. We had a roof before the first hard frost of '65, and 4 walls before Christmas, and a fire in the new hearth on the 23rd of December, 1865, that I still consider one of the finest things I have ever seen in my life. The things I lost that April did not come back. Not all of them. The upper barn we rebuilt smaller. The hog operation I never fully restored to what it had been. There are losses that the land and the work can approximate, but not replace exactly. And I learned to make peace with the approximation. It is a particular skill, making peace with the shape of a thing that is almost but not exactly what it was. I do not know that I would recommend the education, but I will say it has served me. What I want to tell you, and what I have earned the right to tell you through the specific currency of having lived it, is this. The day is not the worst part. The day is terrible. The day is the kind of terrible that empties a person of everything that is not strictly necessary for continuing to stand upright. But the day ends. The sun goes down on what remains and comes up on the same remains, and you are still there in the morning, and the morning requires things of you, and that requirement is the only mercy available. The worst part is the before. The years of work and assumption and the ordinary confidence that what you have built is permanent because you built it carefully and worked for it honestly and did not take it for granted. That confidence is the thing the fire takes that the fire cannot give back. Not the barn, not the house, that particular confidence. You build again, and the new thing is solid and worthy and earns its own respect, but you do not feel about it the way you felt about the first thing. You know now what the wind can do on a dry April afternoon. You know it in a way that cannot be unknown. I am 79 years old. The farm we rebuilt is still standing. My children are grown and gone and well established in their own lives, and I have 7 grandchildren who visit in the summers and do not know and cannot know what the ground they walk on cost. That is as it should be. That is what the work is for. You build so that those who come after you can stand on something solid without having to know the weight of it. But I know. I have always known. And on dry spring mornings, when the wind runs hard from the southwest, I know it in the particular way that the body remembers what the mind has long since agreed to stop discussing. That is the whole of what I have to say. Some things you survive not because you are strong enough, but because the morning comes before you have finished deciding whether you are.